50 royal tutors failed to teach the mute princess until a human janitor used finger puppets. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. In the gleaming capital of the Valorian Empire, where crystalline spires pierced the amber sky and anti-gravity platforms ferried the elite between floating palaces, a simple human janitor named Ethan Cole pushed his cleaning cart through the silent, immaculate corridors of the Royal Academy. Unbeknownst to him, beyond those polished walls, the greatest minds of 7 galactic species had gathered for an emergency summit regarding the Empire's most troubling royal dilemma. High Empress Celoria gazed down at the assembled council from her elevated platform, her 4 violet eyes narrowing with evident distress. The grand meeting hall of the Valorian Palace, a marvel of quantum architecture that shifted subtly with the emotional currents of its occupants, had darkened to match her somber mood. The swirling patterns on her iridescent skin pulsed with a dull, troubled rhythm. Distinguished advisors, renowned educators, honored physicians, she began, her melodic voice carrying throughout the chamber without artificial amplification. For 3 standard cycles, we have failed in our duty to the crown and to the future of our empire. My daughter, Princess Lyra, heir to the 7 systems, remains unable to communicate. 50 of our greatest tutors have attempted to reach her, and 50 have failed. A ripple of discomfort passed through the assembled dignitaries. The princess's condition had become the Empire's most closely guarded concern. At 8 Valorian years, equivalent to 6 Earth years, Princess Lyra had never spoken a word, never responded to the complex sign languages of any species, never engaged with the neural interfaces that were the foundation of advanced Valorian education. Medical scans showed no physical abnormalities, and mental probes detected a bright, active mind. Yet she remained locked within herself, unreachable. Your Radiance, spoke Magister Thalios, the Empire's foremost expert on developmental neuroscience. We have exhausted every conventional and experimental approach. The princess's mind resists our most sophisticated communication technologies. We must consider the possibility that she may never. I will not accept that conclusion, the Empress interrupted, her skin flashing a dangerous crimson. The Valorian bloodline has ruled this sector for 10,000 years. My daughter will not be the end of that legacy. From the back of the chamber, Chief Medical Officer Xylith stepped forward, her serpentine body coiling nervously. Your Radiance, if I may suggest an unorthodox approach. Our understanding of human neural patterns remains incomplete, but their developmental pathways differ significantly from our own. Their primitive communication methods sometimes reach minds that our advanced technologies cannot. The chamber erupted in murmurs of shock and disdain. Humans were a relatively new species to the galactic community, tolerated primarily for their usefulness as manual laborers and their surprising adaptability to various environments. Their neural technology was millennia behind the Valorians, their social structures deemed chaotic and inefficient. To suggest that a human might succeed where the Empire's greatest minds had failed was nearly treasonous. The Empress raised a hand, and silence immediately fell. Elaborate, Chief Xylith. Humans develop communication through what they call play, seemingly purposeless activities that nonetheless create neural pathways essential for their cognitive development. Unlike our species, their young learn not through direct neural downloads, but through this disorganized process of imitation and repetition. It is inefficient, but, she hesitated, it occasionally produces unexpected results. You propose that we allow a human to attempt to teach the princess? The disgust in Counselor Vex's voice was palpable. The royal heir, exposed to their primitive methods. I propose that we have exhausted all conventional options, Xylith replied evenly. The princess will come of age in 1 standard cycle. Without communication abilities, she cannot undergo the rite of ascension. Without the rite, the imperial succession falls into question. The implications hung heavy in the air. Civil war, destabilization across 7 star systems, the collapse of a 10 millennia dynasty. The Empress's skin had paled to a thoughtful blue. Where would we find such a human? One qualified to teach. That, admitted Xylith, presents a challenge. Human educational credentials are rudimentary at best. High Commander Drex, head of the Imperial Security Forces, spoke for the first time. We have a small contingent of humans serving in non-sensitive positions within the palace complex. Maintenance workers, mostly. We could review their files for any with educational experience. The Empress nodded slowly. Do so. Discreetly. The Empire must not know of our desperation. She rose, signaling the end of the discussion. You have one planetary rotation to present candidates. As the council dispersed, none of them noticed the small cleaning drone hovering in the corner of the chamber, its routine maintenance run coincidentally capturing every word of their supposedly secure conversation. Ethan Cole finished mopping the east wing of the Royal Academy, his back aching from hours of work. At 34, he was one of the oldest humans in the palace service. Most didn't last more than a few years before the rigorous standards and subtle discrimination drove them back to the human enclave in the industrial district. But Ethan had nowhere else to go. 8 years earlier, he had been a kindergarten teacher on a struggling Earth colony in the Proxima system. When the colony's atmospheric processors failed, leading to a catastrophic environmental collapse, he had been among the few survivors evacuated by a passing Valorian diplomatic vessel. With his home destroyed and no funds for passage back to Earth, he had accepted a position in the Valorian Palace Maintenance Corps, grateful for the steady pay that allowed him to send regular credits to his sister and her children back on Earth. Cole, human. The harsh voice of Supervisor Krell, a hulking Brassian with leathery gray skin and 4 arms, interrupted his thoughts. Report to security processing. Immediately, Ethan's stomach dropped. Security processing usually meant only one thing for a human worker: termination, often for infractions they weren't even aware they had committed. Sir, have I done something wrong? Not my concern, Krell rumbled, his upper set of arms crossing impatiently. Equipment remains here. Go. Ethan carefully set his mop in the cleaning cart and straightened his plain gray uniform as best he could. As he followed the moving, illuminated path to security processing, his mind raced through possible violations. Had he accidentally entered a restricted area? Used the wrong cleaning solution on some precious Valorian artifact? Failed to show proper deference to a passing dignitary? The processing center was a sterile white chamber where 2 Valorian security officers waited beside a neural scanner. Ethan had been through this process upon hiring. The machine created a superficial map of his thoughts and intentions, identifying any potential security threats. For Valorians, the scan went much deeper, but human neural architecture remained partially resistant to their technology, a fact that made many Valorians deeply suspicious of humans. Ethan Cole, maintenance worker, human, stated the taller officer, her skin a professional shade of green. You will submit to neural mapping. May I ask why? Ethan tried to keep his voice steady. The officers exchanged looks, but offered no explanation as they guided him to the scanner. The familiar, uncomfortable tingling spread through his skull as the machine hummed softly. After several minutes, the female officer checked the readout and nodded to her colleague. Follow, she said simply, turning toward the door. They led him through corridors he had never seen before, each more opulent than the last. The floors shifted from simple polished stone to what appeared to be flowing liquid metal that hardened precisely beneath their feet with each step. The walls displayed scenes of Valorian history, great space battles, diplomatic triumphs, the founding of their interstellar empire. Finally, they arrived at an ornate doorway guarded by elite sentinel drones. Wait here, instructed the officer, before both of them disappeared through the doorway. Ethan stood awkwardly, trying to ignore the unblinking optical sensors of the sentinel drones tracking his every movement. After what seemed an eternity, the door reopened, and a tall, serpentine figure beckoned him inside. Ethan Cole, I am Chief Medical Officer Xylith, she said, her voice surprisingly warm. Thank you for your patience. The room beyond was nothing like the utilitarian spaces where humans typically worked. A vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling displaying what appeared to be a real-time map of the local galaxy. Comfortable seating areas were arranged around a central platform, and on that platform, surrounded by displays showing complex data, stood the unmistakable figure of the Empress herself. Ethan immediately dropped to one knee, head bowed as all palace workers had been instructed to do in the unlikely event of a royal encounter. "Rise, human," came the Empress's melodious voice. "We have matters to discuss." Ethan stood, carefully keeping his eyes lowered as was protocol. "You may look at me," the Empress said, a hint of impatience in her tone. "This conversation requires direct communication." Cautiously, Ethan raised his gaze to meet the Empress's violet eyes. Her skin swirled with patterns of blue and gold, colors he had never seen on a Valorian before. Later, he would learn they indicated curiosity and desperate hope. "Our records indicate that on Earth, you were an educator of young humans," the Empress stated. "Yes, Your Radiance. I taught kindergarten, children between 5 and 6 years old." "And what methods did you employ to teach these children?" The question seemed odd, but Ethan answered truthfully. "Various methods, Your Radiance. Games, stories, songs, art projects. Children that age learn best through play and creative expression." "Games," the Empress repeated, as though testing an unfamiliar word. She turned to Xylith. "Is this the play you referenced?" The medical officer nodded. "Yes, Your Radiance. Human neural development relies heavily on these activities." The Empress returned her attention to Ethan. "Human, what we are about to discuss is classified at the highest imperial level. Disclosure will result in immediate neural wiping. Do you understand?" Ethan swallowed hard. Neural wiping was essentially a death sentence. The person survived, but with no memories or personality intact. "I understand, Your Radiance." Over the next hour, the Empress and her advisors explained the situation with Princess Lyra. Ethan listened with growing disbelief. They wanted him, a human janitor with a defunct teaching career, to attempt to reach the heir to the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. "But I have no experience with Valorian children," he protested when they finished. "Your species develops differently from humans. I wouldn't know where to begin." "That is precisely why you might succeed where others have failed," Xylith explained. "The princess has been subjected to every Valorian teaching method, every advanced technology. Perhaps she requires something different." "How long would I have?" Ethan asked, already mentally calculating what a successful royal tutoring would mean for his family back on Earth. The compensation would be enough to move his sister and her children out of the overcrowded habitat blocks, maybe even secure them passage to one of the better colonies. The princess must demonstrate basic communication skills before her ascension ceremony. "Exactly 30 standard days from now," said a stern-looking Valorian whom Ethan recognized as High Commander Drex. "You will be given access to her royal chambers for 2 hours each day. You will be monitored at all times. You will have no physical contact with the princess except in emergency situations." The Empress stepped forward. "Understand, human, that this assignment is both an extraordinary opportunity and a grave responsibility. Should you succeed, you will be rewarded beyond your imagination. Should you fail," her skin darkened ominously, "you will simply return to your previous duties, with a memory adjustment to remove any knowledge of the princess's condition." It wasn't really a request, Ethan realized. "I'll do my best, Your Radiance." "You begin tomorrow," the Empress said, turning away in clear dismissal. The princess's chambers occupied an entire floating platform connected to the main palace by a single light bridge. As Ethan was escorted across by stone-faced security officers the next morning, he clutched a small bag containing the few materials he'd been permitted to bring: some colored paper, safe scissors, non-toxic adhesives, and a few simple toys he'd fabricated overnight from scraps in the maintenance bay. The princess's antechamber was a marvel of Valorian design, with walls that could display any environment from across the empire and furniture that that reconfigured itself based on biometric readings of its occupants. Currently, it showed a serene forest scene from one of the outer colony worlds, complete with gentle ambient sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls. "Princess Lyra will join you momentarily," said his escort, before retreating to an observation station at the far side of the room. Ethan set down his bag and tried to calm his racing heart. He had faced classrooms full of rambunctious 5-year-olds, but somehow the prospect of meeting a single Valorian princess terrified him more. What if she was frightened by his alien appearance? What if she refused to acknowledge him at all? What if? His thoughts were interrupted by a subtle change in the room's lighting. A hidden door slid open, and 2 royal attendants entered, accompanying a small figure between them. Princess Lyra was nothing like Ethan had imagined. He had expected an intimidating miniature version of the Empress, but the child before him seemed almost fragile. Like all Valorians, she had 4 eyes and iridescent skin, but where the Empress's skin displayed bold, confident patterns, the princess's showed only faint, hesitant swirls of pale yellow, a color Ethan would later learn indicated anxiety and uncertainty. She was dressed in an elaborate formal gown that seemed to weigh down her small frame, and her posture was perfect, too perfect for a child her age, suggesting hours of rigorous training. Her 4 eyes darted around the room, carefully avoiding looking directly at Ethan. "Your Highness," he said gently, bowing low. "My name is Ethan. I'm very pleased to meet you." The princess gave no indication that she had heard him. One of the attendants spoke. "The princess does not respond to verbal communication. 50 tutors have attempted various methods without success." The dismissive tone made it clear that this attendant expected Ethan to be the 51st failure. "Thank you," Ethan replied evenly. "I'd like to spend some time alone with the princess now." The attendants looked scandalized. "That is not protocol. We must remain." "The human has been authorized direct interaction," interrupted the security officer from his station. "You will withdraw to the adjacent chamber." With obvious reluctance, the attendants bowed and exited. Ethan was now alone with the princess. Well, alone except for the security officer watching from a distance and whatever invisible monitoring systems were undoubtedly recording every movement. The princess stood motionless in the center of the room, still avoiding eye contact. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, deliberately making himself smaller and less threatening. "I'm going to sit here and make something," he said conversationally, as though the princess had responded to his greeting. "You're welcome to watch if you'd like, or you can do something else. It's entirely up to you." He reached into his bag and pulled out the colored paper and scissors. With practiced movements, he began cutting simple shapes, circles, squares, triangles, arranging them on the floor before him. He hummed softly as he worked, an old earth lullaby his mother had sung to him. From the corner of his eye, he could see the princess watching, though whenever he glanced her way, she quickly looked elsewhere. After about 15 minutes of this, he began assembling his paper shapes, gluing small circles onto larger ones, adding triangles for ears. "When I was teaching on Earth," he said, still working, "my students loved it when I made finger puppets. They're simple, but there's something magical about bringing them to life." He slipped the completed puppet, a simple cat face, onto his index finger and made it walk across the floor. "Meow," he said in a high-pitched voice. "Hello, Princess Lyra. My name is Whiskers." He made the puppet bow comically low, toppling over in the process. Then he righted it and continued, "I'm very pleased to be in your beautiful palace. I've never been anywhere so grand before. On Earth, I lived in a small house with a garden." As he spoke, he used his other hand to quickly assemble a simple house and garden from the remaining paper shapes. The puppet walked around this paper scene as he narrated a simple story about Whiskers the cat and his adventures in the garden. Throughout his performance, Ethan never directly addressed the princess or attempted to engage her. He simply told his story to the puppet and paper props, occasionally chuckling at his own jokes or asking Whiskers questions and answering in the puppet's voice. He was so absorbed in his performance that he almost didn't notice when a small figure cautiously sat down at the edge of his paper scene. The princess had moved closer, her eyes now fixed on the finger puppet. Her skin was showing traces of a new color, a soft pink that pulsed gently with the rhythm of the story. Ethan continued his tale without acknowledging her presence, afraid that any direct attention might cause her to withdraw. When he finished the short story, he simply began another one, this time using his other hand to create a second puppet, a friendly dog named Barker who lived next door to Whiskers. By the end of the 2-hour session, Princess Lyra had moved to sit directly across from him, her eyes never leaving the puppets. She had made no attempt to communicate, had not touched any of the materials, but the security officer noted in his report that the princess had remained engaged for a longer period than with any previous tutor. As Ethan packed up his supplies, he said casually, "Tomorrow, I thought Whiskers and Barker might go on a space adventure. Would that be all right?" He didn't expect an answer and didn't receive one, but as he stood to leave, he noticed that the princess's skin had brightened considerably, showing swirls of the soft pink he had seen earlier. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of the joy that had once made him love teaching. He bowed respectfully to the princess. "Until tomorrow, Your Highness." Over the next week, Ethan established a routine. Each day, he would arrive at the princess's chambers with new materials and ideas. Each day, he would tell stories with increasingly elaborate finger puppets, never pressuring the princess to participate, but always leaving space for her to join if she wished. On the 7th day, as he told a story about Whiskers discovering a mysterious glowing crystal, represented by a small piece of reflective material he had salvaged from the maintenance bay, something extraordinary happened. As Whiskers in the story debated what to do with the crystal, Ethan deliberately left a long pause. In that pause, the princess cautiously extended one slender finger toward the paper scene. She touched the crystal gently, then withdrew her hand immediately. Ethan, careful to hide his excitement, had Whiskers say, "Oh." The crystal moved all by itself. How magical! The princess's skin flushed a vibrant shade of pink, the brightest color Ethan had seen on her. Emboldened, he moved his puppet closer to where her finger had touched. "I wonder if the crystal will move again. Perhaps it's trying to tell me something?" After a moment's hesitation, the princess again reached out, this time moving the crystal deliberately to a different part of the paper scene. "Amazing!" Whiskers exclaimed. "The crystal is showing me the way to the enchanted garden." For the next half hour, Ethan and the princess engaged in a silent game, with her moving the crystal and him interpreting its movements as directions for Whiskers. Though she never spoke, never smiled, her increasingly bright skin colors and focused attention told Ethan all he needed to know. A connection had been formed. That evening, he was summoned to report to the Empress. In the same grand chamber as before, he described the day's breakthrough. Physical engagement with objects, Xylith observed. A significant development. The princess has never willingly interacted with educational materials before. It's a very small step, Ethan cautioned. She's not communicating in a conventional sense yet. But she is making choices, the Empress said, her skin showing the blue-gold pattern Ethan now recognized as hope. She is expressing preferences. Continue, human. You have 23 days remaining. On the 10th day, Ethan brought a new element to their sessions. Having noticed the princess's fascination with his finger puppets, he had spent his evening hours creating a set of more elaborate hand puppets representing various species from across the galaxy. A Valorian, a Brassian, a Nebulan, and, of course, a human. "Today," he told the princess, who now sat expectantly across from him as soon as the attendants departed, "we have some new friends joining us." He introduced each puppet, giving them distinct voices and personalities. When he reached the Valorian puppet, which he had carefully crafted to have 4 small button eyes and iridescent fabric for skin, he noticed the princess leaning forward, her own eyes wide with interest. "This is Vela," Ethan said, making the puppet bow gracefully. "She's very wise and kind, and her favorite thing to do is dance among the stars." He moved the puppet in a swirling motion meant to suggest dancing. To his astonishment, The princess raised her hands and mimicked the movement, her fingers creating an even more complex pattern in the air. It was the first time she had deliberately imitated any of his actions. "Oh, Vela is very impressed by your dancing," Ethan said through the puppet. "She wonders if you might show her another movement?" The princess hesitated, then performed another flowing gesture with her hands. Ethan immediately had the puppet copy it, praising the princess's creativity. Soon, they were engaged in a silent conversation of movement, with the princess teaching the puppet new dance steps and the puppet responding enthusiastically. By the end of the session, Ethan had learned that Valorian hand movements were actually a form of expression far more nuanced than he had realized. The princess wasn't just moving randomly. She was speaking through traditional Valorian dance patterns, something none of the previous tutors had recognized as communication because they had been focused on verbal or written language. When he reported this discovery to the Empress, her skin flashed with brilliant gold patterns. "Dance speech," she breathed. An ancient form of Valorian communication, rarely used in modern times except in certain ceremonial contexts. The princess has been watching the court dancers during state functions. She's been trying to communicate all along, Ethan realized, just not in the ways anyone expected. The Empress's four eyes fixed on him with new respect. "You have achieved more in 10 days than 50 royal tutors accomplished in 3 cycles. But dance speech, while beautiful, is not sufficient for the ascension ceremony. The princess must demonstrate more conventional communication before she comes of age." Ethan nodded. "I believe we can build on this foundation, your radiance. The princess has shown she wants to connect. We just need to find the right bridge between her world and ours." On the 15th day, that bridge began to take form. Ethan had brought a new set of materials, soft clay in various colors. As usual, he began by telling a story with his puppets, but today the story involved the characters discovering a magical substance that could take any shape they imagined. "Look what Whiskers found," he said, bringing out the clay. He molded a simple star shape. Now Whiskers can make anything he dreams of. The princess watched intently as he created several simple objects: a tree, a bird, a tiny spacecraft. Then, breaking from his usual pattern, he pushed a ball of unused clay toward her. "Whiskers wonders if you might like to make something too," he suggested gently. For several long moments, the princess stared at the clay without moving. Just as Ethan was beginning to think he had pushed too far, too fast, she reached out and took it. Her slender fingers worked the material tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. When she finished, she placed her creation beside his figures. It was remarkably detailed for a child her age, a perfect miniature replica of the Valorian royal palace, complete with its floating platforms and light bridges. "That's beautiful," Ethan said sincerely. "Whiskers is very impressed by your palace." The princess's skin glowed with pleasure, showing a new color, a deep, satisfied purple. She pointed at the palace model, then at herself, then made a series of flowing gestures with her hands. "Is this your home?" Ethan asked, mimicking her pointing between the palace and herself. The princess nodded, the first clear, universal affirmative gesture she had made. Ethan's heart raced with excitement, but he kept his voice calm. "Would you like to tell a story about the palace? Perhaps Whiskers and his friends could visit." The princess considered this, then nodded again. She pointed to the human puppet, then to the clay palace, then to herself. "You want the human puppet to visit you at the palace?" Another nod, more emphatic this time. For the remainder of the session, they enacted a story together, with Ethan voicing all the puppets and the princess directing the action through gestures and arrangement of the clay figures. She never spoke aloud, but her intentions became increasingly clear through her movements and the subtle color changes of her skin. That night, when Ethan reported to the Empress, Chief Medical Officer Xylith was particularly excited. "Intentional communication through multiple modalities," she observed. "Gestural affirmations, spatial arrangements, color emotional responses. The princess is demonstrating a complex communicative repertoire. She understands everything we say," Ethan explained. And she can communicate her thoughts quite clearly once you learn to read her gestures and color patterns. She's not non-communicative. She simply communicates differently. But the Ascension ceremony requires verbal or written responses to the sacred questions, the Empress said, her skin showing conflicting patterns of joy and concern. The Council of Elders will not accept alternative forms of communication, no matter how sophisticated. Then we need to find a way to translate her natural communication style into one the Council will recognize, Ethan suggested. I have an idea, but I'll need access to certain materials. On the 20th day, Ethan arrived at the princess's chambers with a special device he had designed with the help of the palace's technical division, a small tablet with a custom interface that responded to touch, movement, and color sensitivity. It had been programmed to recognize the princess's particular gestural patterns and translate them into Valorian script. "Your Highness," he said after their usual puppet story, "I've brought something new today. It's a special kind of drawing pad that can help Whiskers understand your dance speech even better." The princess examined the tablet curiously. When she passed her hand over it, the screen lit up with Valorian characters corresponding to her movement. Her 4 eyes widened in surprise. She repeated the gesture, watching as the words formed on the screen. For the first time, Ethan saw a new color pattern ripple across her skin, a bright, sparkling silver that he would later learn signified delight. "You see," he said, "now you can talk to Whiskers and all his friends in a way everyone can understand." The princess spent the remainder of the session experimenting with the tablet, discovering how different movements produced different words and phrases. By the end, she had used it to express several clear thoughts. "Palace beautiful. Like puppets. Ethan friend." That last message had nearly brought tears to Ethan's eyes. "I'm honored to be your friend, Your Highness," he had responded. When he reported this breakthrough to the Empress, she was visibly moved, her skin displaying complex patterns of emotion. "You have given my daughter a voice," she said softly. "The Council must recognize this as valid communication for the Ascension ceremony." "There's still the matter of the sacred questions," Xylith reminded her gently. "The princess must be able to respond specifically to those, not just express general thoughts." "What are these questions?" Ethan asked. "Perhaps I can help her prepare." The Empress shook her head. "The sacred questions are known only to the Council of Elders until the ceremony itself. It is tradition." "Then we'll continue building her skills with the tablet," Ethan said. "With 10 days remaining, I believe she can master enough vocabulary to handle unexpected questions." The final days before the Ascension ceremony saw remarkable progress. The princess quickly adapted to the translation tablet, expanding her vocabulary and constructing increasingly complex sentences. She never spoke aloud, but through the tablet, she revealed herself to be thoughtful, observant, and surprisingly witty. On the 25th day, she used the tablet to ask Ethan a question that stunned him: why humans considered lesser? He had paused, unsure how to answer such a politically sensitive query from the future Empress. Finally, he said, "Different species have different strengths and capabilities. Valorians excel at many things that humans find difficult." The princess considered this, then typed, "Different, not lesser." Ethan taught when others failed. On the 29th day, their final session before the ceremony, the princess surprised Ethan once more. When he arrived, she was waiting with a gift, a small figurine she had molded from the clay, fired and glazed with the help of her attendants. It depicted Ethan with Whiskers the cat puppet on one hand and Vela the Valorian puppet on the other. For Ethan, the tablet translated as she presented it to him. "Remember Princess Lyra. I could never forget you, Your Highness," he assured her, deeply touched by the gesture. "Tomorrow you'll show everyone how brilliant you truly are." She nodded confidently, then typed one more message: "Not afraid now. Ethan taught me voice." The day of the Ascension ceremony arrived with great fanfare throughout the capital. The floating palace platforms were adorned with shimmering light sculptures, and diplomatic representatives from all 7 systems had gathered to witness the historic event. Ethan, dressed in formal attire provided by the royal household, was escorted to a special observation area reserved for those who had rendered exceptional service to the crown. He sat nervously, clutching the clay figurine the princess had given him, as the grand ceremonial hall filled with dignitaries. The empress entered in full regalia, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her for at least 10 meters, carried by attendants. Her skin displayed the royal colors of confidence and authority, deep blues and purples with flashes of gold. She took her place on the central platform, and a hush fell over the assembly. "Today," she announced, her voice carrying throughout the vast space, "my daughter, Princess Lyra, heir to the 7 systems, presents herself for the rite of ascension." From a side entrance, the princess emerged. Gone was the uncertain child Ethan had first met. Princess Lyra walked with poise and dignity, her skin displaying the same royal colors as her mother's. She carried the translation tablet discreetly in her hands. The Council of Elders, 7 ancient Valorians with skin so translucent their internal bioluminescence was clearly visible, floated forward on anti-gravity platforms. The eldest spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. "Princess Lyra, are you prepared to answer the sacred questions that have tested all heirs to the Valorian throne since the Dawn era?" The princess nodded, then typed on her tablet. The device projected her response in glowing Valorian script above her head. "I am prepared, honored elder." A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd at this unconventional method of communication. The elder's skin showed momentary confusion, but the empress spoke quickly. "My daughter communicates through this device, which translates her natural movement language into our script. The royal physician will confirm this is a valid neurological adaptation, not a technological substitution." Xylith floated forward and presented data crystals to the elders. After a brief consultation, the lead elder nodded. "We will proceed with the questioning." What followed was a series of increasingly complex questions about Valorian history, interstellar diplomacy, quantum ethics, and the responsibilities of rulership. To each, the princess responded thoughtfully through her tablet, her answers displaying a depth of understanding that clearly impressed the council. Finally, the lead elder posed the last and most important question. "Princess Lyra, why do you wish to rule the 7 systems?" The princess's skin shifted to a color Ethan had never seen before, a deep, resonant gold threaded with silver. She raised her hands, performing a brief, elegant sequence of dance speech movements, then typed her response. The words that appeared above her head made Ethan catch his breath. "I wish to rule not for power or glory, but to be a bridge between worlds. Like the human who taught me to speak when all others failed, I believe that different is not lesser. The 7 systems thrive on diversity, not uniformity. As Empress, I would listen to all voices, especially those that speak in unexpected ways." The Council of Elders conferred briefly, their ancient faces inscrutable. Then, in unison, they raised their hands in the traditional gesture of acceptance. "The heir has satisfied the sacred questions," announced the lead elder. "Princess Lyra is confirmed as rightful successor to the Valorian throne." The assembly erupted in applause and celebrations. The Empress's skin blazed with pride as she embraced her daughter. From his observation post, Ethan watched with his own sense of pride, though tinged with the knowledge that his time with the princess had come to an end. Tomorrow he would return to his maintenance duties, carrying only memories and a small clay figurine as evidence of his brief role in imperial history. Later that evening, as celebrations continued throughout the capital, Ethan was summoned once more to the Empress's private chambers. He found both the Empress and Princess Lyra waiting for him, along with several high-ranking officials. "Ethan Cole of Earth," the Empress began formally. "You have rendered an incalculable service to the throne and to the Empire. The traditional reward would be wealth and titles, but I sense these would not satisfy you." "Your radiance is correct," Ethan replied respectfully. "My only wish is security for my family on Earth." "That has already been arranged," the Empress said with a dismissive gesture. Your sister and her children have been relocated to an estate in the human district of the capital. They will want for nothing." Ethan's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Radiance. That is more than generous." However, the Empress continued, "The princess has made a special request regarding your future service." She nodded to her daughter. Princess Lyra stepped forward, tablet in hand. She typed quickly, and the words appeared in the air between them. Ethan Cole to become Royal Communications Advisor. Create new education program based on human methods. Teach others to understand different voices. The princess wishes to establish a new educational division within the palace, explained one of the officials. The Imperial Chancellor, Ethan realized with shock. A program to identify and nurture children throughout the 7 systems who, like the princess, communicate in non-standard ways. She wishes you to lead this initiative. Me? Ethan stammered. But I'm just a... You are no longer just anything, the Empress interrupted. You are the human who succeeded where 50 of our greatest minds failed. You gave my daughter a voice and preserved the imperial succession. Your understanding of different communication styles could transform education throughout our systems. The princess typed again. Say yes, Ethan friend. Looking at the hopeful expression in the princess's 4 eyes, at the opportunity to return to the work he had once loved, at the chance to make a difference for countless children across 7 star systems, Ethan knew there was only one possible answer. It would be my honor, Your Highness. 6 months later, Ethan stood in the newly established Royal Institute for Diverse Communication, watching as students from a dozen different species engaged with learning materials based on his methods. In one corner, a young Brassian with a neurological difference that prevented normal telepathic development was using finger puppets to tell a story to his classmates. In another, a Nebulan child whose gas exchange communication had never properly developed was using a modified version of the princess's translation tablet. Princess Lyra herself visited regularly, working directly with the children and constantly refining the translation technology that had given her a voice. Though she still never spoke aloud, her tablet had evolved to project her thoughts with increasing sophistication, and her dance speech had been formally recognized as a royal art form, with dancers throughout the empire studying her unique patterns. As for Ethan, he had found a new purpose far beyond anything he could have imagined when he'd first accepted that maintenance position. His sister and her children thrived in their new home. His educational methods were being studied and implemented throughout the 7 systems, and he had become something of a celebrity in human communities across the galaxy. The janitor who had taught a princess and changed an empire. All because he had seen value in difference, recognized communication where others saw only silence, and understood that sometimes the simplest tools, like finger puppets made from scrap paper, could bridge the greatest divides. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.